Hello, friends. Welcome to a brand new season of Events Demystify podcast, your one shop stop for tangible, technical, and planning advice for anyone in the event industry. This brand new season is sponsored by Fun Events, a woman owned boutique event production agency, planning and producing events, hybrid and virtual. And I am your host, Anka Trifan. It is my greatest pleasure to invite you to tune in into one of my most favorite seasons to date, a season that it's been a long time in the making from conception to actualization, only because for some reason it's kind of hard to find women behind the scenes in event production, and that has been quite the task. And even if they are found, they've been very hard to convince to come on the mic, on record, and talk about their experience and about their challenges and about their journey into this male dominated field. And I can understand the reservation because I have been one of those women for a very long time before I said, screw it. I'm going to talk about a lot of the things that people don't necessarily talk about because there's so many reasons why that doesn't happen. So, first off, I want to thank everyone that has showed up, everyone that has accepted the invite, all those brave feature guests that you're going to hear from in the upcoming episodes. Each one of these ladies is a badass in her own right. And I am super humbled to have had the opportunity and the honor of interviewing them. They do come from different sides of the event industry. You will hear from a wide range of positions in the event industry as well as event production. And we will shine a light on some of the opportunities that are available for women in this field, as I have been quite vocal about it lately. It is not an easy field to be in as a woman, especially once you start a family, especially when life gets in the way. And I know that there's a lot to be said about that. I am looking forward to talk more about it. What I'm going to end with is that it's totally worth it. And there are so many rewards in so many different ways. So if you want to find out more about it, make sure that you tune in. I hope you do stay with us, and I hope that you do enjoy each one of those conversations and each one of the episodes that will be airing out every week on Fridays. And I invite you to reach out and maybe nominate a woman in event productions, a woman behind the scenes, a powerhouse that is deserving of having her story shared, someone that you know that has been in the industry for a while and has got quite the story to tell. I would love to highlight more women and maybe inspire in the process someone else that is new to the industry with their stories and with their journeys. So having those conversations with all of these women is such a treat. I do hope that you will enjoy it as much as I did. I do hope that this will move the needle a little bit towards having more opportunities for women in this field to open up, and for women to feel more comfortable, to feel like they belong and they have a seat at the table. The world of AV production is not an easy world to either break into or stay into. So I hope that if there's someone that is making an impact in the industry, someone that is changing the status quo, someone that is paving the way for more women to find opportunities for themselves in this field, I hope you nominate them. Drop me a line, send me a message, find me on social. There's plenty of ways ways to reach me. So do that, please. So in no particular order, you will hear from Tahira Andin, the head of program at IMAX. She's the author of Intentional Event Design, Our Professional Opportunity. Maggie Harker, senior manager and event scheduler at Freeman Company. Samantha Porter, she's an audio engineer and a install empress. Erica Kulovitz, president and executive producer of Akiri Productions. Annette Jukes, a graphic operator and designer, content manager, and event specialist, and many, many more that are currently on the pipeline. I'm super stoked about this season. I hope you are too. Tune in and also subscribe to the podcast and share it with your network so more women in the event industry, in the event production, get to hear about it and feel empowered by the stories that will be shared here shortly. Check out the first episode of the season rolling out as we speak. Welcome to another episode, but also to a brand new season. And I'm super excited to release a new series of episodes that would highlight a lot of behind the scenes event professionals that otherwise you don't necessarily have the opportunity to shine the light on. From my experience, most behind the scenes people, they're behind the scenes because they want to stay there. So even having those conversations sometimes, it takes an extra level of persuasion. So super exciting. I hope that you're going to get a lot out of this new season. Today's episode is sponsored by Trifan Events, a woman-owned boutique production agency. And I am your host, Anka Trifan.
Welcome to Events Demystified podcast, where we explore and demystify the world of in-person, virtual, hybrid event AV production and technology by sharing insightful tips, tricks and tactics to make your events a success. This podcast is brought to you by Trifan Events, a woman-owned boutique event production agency. And your host is Anka Trifan, a technical event planner and producer with almost 2 decades of hands-on technical experience in event production.
On the show with me today, I have Maggie Harker, Senior Manager, Event Scheduling, Management, and Producing. Maggie is a live event professional with 20 years of experience as a technician, stage manager, producer, show caller, production manager, and labor manager for theater, conventions, corporate events, and touring shows. Her strengths are in management, logistics, show calling, leading crews, labor contracts, scheduling, technical designs, and layouts, drafting in Vectorworks, pre-production planning, client wrangling, and on-site execution. Currently, utilizing her skills, she is running a team that directly responds and directly is responsible for event recruiting and staffing for the Western region of the United States. Maggie is entering her 21st year of producing and supporting live events and connecting with humans in impactful ways, which has brought a source of light to her life, even in the very dark of times. Aside from all of that, she's a mom. She's worked almost every role in live events, and she ran 13 marathons in 2 countries and 4 states, including an ultra marathon. That is fantastic. I can't wait to have this conversation with Maggie. You can learn more about her and how badass she is via the links posted in the episode notes. And in the meantime, let's bring her in. Maggie, welcome to the show. What a pleasure to have you here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Anka.
I'm so excited. Can you tell?
Yeah, Very excited to be here. I've heard a lot about you and your work, and I've been checking out the podcast, and just very honored and excited that you chose to continue the conversation with me. So
Well,
thank
guess
you.
what? I'm super excited because it's very, very rare that I get another event professional from the live event production background with over 20 years of experience that happens to also be a female to sit down and have a conversation with. Okay, somehow this combination of things is very rare and very hard to find. Tell me why.
I don't know, I think, gosh, I think it could be for a lot of reasons. And I could probably go on ad nauseum on this subject. So when you're ready to cut me off, cut me off. But I think that production can be an intimidating environment. It can be an intimidating subject matter. And I also think that there just aren't a lot of opportunities for, human beings in general to get their foot in the door. And then even harder, I think, for women to get their foot in the door if it wasn't something that they, grew up doing. I was really lucky in that at a young age, I had an interest in theater and theater arts and was in an environment that supported me. But by putting me in a place where I was on stage, when I was on stage in these places, kind of growing up in school and in summer camp, I always noticed it out of the corner of my eye. The first thing I noticed was somebody painting sets and scenic. I was like, what's that person doing? Oh, that's cool. And then I started looking up and looking around, and I was like, man, it takes more than the people on stage to do this. And we would look pretty silly without what's around us, right? So I kind of got interested in that. And then I was lucky that my school had an opportunity for me to learn about technical theater. And then from there, it just leapfrogged, right? So I was really lucky that I was put in an environment where I was given opportunities to explore that, and was given my first job at the age of 14 as a spotlight operator through those opportunities. And it just from there, right, was like the director of that show called me for the next thing. They call me for the next thing. So this is very much in my upbringing and in my blood. But for somebody who hasn't had that, to get into it, I think is just very intimidating. It's like, where do you start? How do you learn? I feel like, you almost need mentors to help guide you through the processes.
Absolutely. I mean, you answered my first question. I was going to ask you as to what possessed you to enter this field. But what I heard from everything that you just said, the ability to be given an opportunity from a young age, which has really guided you into this path that maybe otherwise, if it wasn't for those opportunities, you might have not pursued. And it sounded like at the time, you had a good experience as you were pursuing this brand new interesting thing, and it worked out way more than probably you imagined that it might have. And I want to dive a little bit more into your live event production journey, and how has it developed or changed over the last 20 years of your obviously years in the industry, but also especially the last 36 something months as we went through this pandemic?
That's a great question. I think my very first opportunities, obviously the passion and the curiosity drove me, right? I found something that was exciting, and I was in a supportive environment. And I think that environment is the thing that I've noticed that has changed the most or stayed the consistent the most, right? So I found something that sparked my curiosity. And then everybody around me, especially I think because of my age, they were really supportive, right? And when you're in an educational environment, they're supportive. And that's what kind of led me to continue on, was I was learning all of these things, but I wasn't, and we can talk about this later too, I wasn't made a fool for having questions, and I wasn't made a fool for not knowing the answers. So
or being thrown in a situation that you weren't yet prepared to handle.
Yeah, I definitely think I was thrown into a lot of situations that I was not ready to handle. I think that comes with the territory here. Is that's how everybody learns in live events. They're like, here's your C wrench, here's what you're supposed to wear. And they kick you off into the deep end and help you get out. But because of my education.
But I mean, in the beginning process of this learning process, because I know later down, probably in your journey, as it happened to me too, is like, well, go and figure it out. Why are those LED lights not working and syncing with each other? I don't know. Go and figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, those educational environments, they're super supportive, right? So then when you get kind of out into the actual professional world, maybe that's your secret phone call is like, okay, they threw me into the deep end, mentor, like, what do I do now? But then you learn over time, like, what is this and what is that? So I think as I've gone from, I started in theater and then I moved into theatrical touring. And I would say, I'm going to use the phrase that everybody hates to hear now, which is pre-pandemic. Like
Right.
pre-pandemic, I feel like the industry, and it still is,
Yeah.
was super demanding and super taxing, and you're expected to pull off miracles. But I think pre-pandemic, it was a lot easier to pull off miracles. It's like, okay, my trucks are late because they got stuck in a snowstorm, but my customer still wants the sun and the moon and the stars. And pre-pandemic, you had so many more resources available to you in order to pull off that miracle. And then in those 36 months of the world changing and the world shutting down, I went from, theater and corporate events and conventions. I pivoted just like everybody else. At one point, I did try to sell health and life insurance. It was not for me. It was not for me. Live events are the only thing I've known since a young age. So I'm not a great salesperson unless I really truly believe in it. I've noticed that about myself.
I love that because I had an inkling the same way in the middle of the pandemic, wondering, okay, how am I going to support myself? If it wasn't that I was going to do this, virtual events until we go back to in person or hybrid, whatever, I was questioning the same thing. Would I be able to? Because there is a level of selling in our business, right? Especially if you're on the customer client interfacing side of the business, which if you have a business, you have to be. But then I was questioning myself the same way as you came to the same conclusion. Would I be able to do whatever else with the same passion? And the answer was a hard no.
Hard no. And that's what I've learned about things that I love. If I love it and I really truly believe in it at my core and my soul, I will sell the heck out of it without even realizing that I'm selling it. But
Exactly.
if I have to put on a fake show of selling something, I'm terrible. I fall flat on my face. But, I was lucky. I then very quickly after that got a phone call saying, hey, we're looking for virtual event producers. So I very quickly crash course thrown into the deep end at this stage of my, 15 years into my career, 18, 20 years into my career.
Was video production ever like part of your background before?
No.
Never, right?
Never. And actually, I remembered interviewing at the company that I work for now, which is not a secret, it's Freeman.
Right.
I'll never forget my first interview when they said, how much do you know about video? My background, just so everybody knows, my background is in sound design and show calling and backstage management. Before moving into the convention industry in theater, I was a production stage manager and a show caller. And so I knew enough about all the departments to be like dangerous, but not enough to be considered a professional in any of those disciplines beyond supportive and helpful. They asked how much I know about video. And I said, I could probably plug a laptop, like connect it to a projector with an S cable, but like that's about all I got. And that elicited laughs in the interview room, luckily. But I've learned so much since then. So, moving from theater to conventions, my education about the disciplines and, how to design for them in a larger format really took off. And then moving into virtual event production, the thing that I realized I lacked the most knowledge in was actually all of the IT skills. It's like how to use platforms like Zoom and StreamYard and keeping your files organized in a platform like Orchestrate, or there's another one called Island, I think, something like that. But I realized that I knew very little about the internet. I knew very little about,
everybody's checked their emails on the internet for like a lifetime, but like the inner beings of like, how does this all IT work behind, just the interface that we use probably is not going to be something that most people are curious about or even like needing to learn much about.
Yes. Yeah. I had no clue. I was clueless. But I learned a lot. And then I feel like just as I got good at this thing, producing virtual events and keeping track of clients' schedules, how to manage, multiple virtual event channels. So I did produce an event that had, it was 86 meeting rooms a day virtually. And after like conquering that event, I finally felt like that was my third or fourth event into the pandemic virtually. I finally felt like skilled and adept at producing a large scale virtual event with several meeting rooms. And just as I felt like I got that skill down, live shows started happening. I was like, great. Just as I worked long enough to get my name out there and probably convince a bunch of people that I was terrible at this thing, I figured it out. And then I could be good at this thing. And just as I was like, yay, I'm going to produce a bunch of virtual shows, people will see that I'm not like terrible at this. Live events started happening again. And I got called back to work in labor and staffing. And that's kind of where I am now. And I think in this post-pandemic world, the thing that we see is that we're still expected to pull off the miracles. We have half of the resources.
Yeah. I bet, and we're going to get into this as we move through our conversation, the labor has been not the same, what you used to schedule and have available to pull on shows before the pandemic versus what's available now.
The availability of labor has definitely changed. I think a lot of people in the pandemic either retired or found a new passion or took a new job or took a new career out of necessity. And now they don't want to leave. I think some people found that they were happier in the new thing that they pursued. I think some people still are a little worried. You know, they don't know how stable live events are going to be anymore. And I think that they would like to avoid the whole thing. I think, you know, there's a lot going on. Some people are still afraid to be out at these large events.
And some people, like you said, they didn't necessarily have the same capacity to pivot into something that they have not done before. And I think there's very few people that had that ability, and the ones that have, now they have a new set of skills, as you have mentioned that you got good at something that before would have definitely not been something that you'd have done or known about. But now this new set of skills, I feel like in the world of what looks like to be hybrid events, you know, combination both in person and virtual, and what else is going to be thrown in the mix with the metaverse. Now you have the understanding and the capability to pull something like that off, which only makes you even more dangerous, as you mentioned in the beginning, right?
Yes. Yeah. I'm thankful for those skills and that I was able to pivot, you know, virtually in this industry and then live in this industry. But as you were mentioning, some folks were not.
Yeah. So before we even dive into that part of your career, because I'm super, super stoked about that and talking more what that entails. And I mean, it takes a specific person to be able to handle that. I'm just curious, as you're mentioning about this transformation of you going from like live event productions into the virtual world, what type of person do you feel like it takes to have that ability to be quick on their feet, to learn new skills, to have this growth mindset, to even have the desire to learn something completely new, you know, many years into their career?
What type of person do I think it takes? I think it takes somebody that is not afraid to fail and that is curious to learn and willing to learn. A lot of times I think we see that people don't want to get into this industry because they're resistant to putting in the work and putting themselves out there. You know, I touched on this a little bit about the environment, right? And the educational environment was so supportive. And I was able to learn without being made to feel like a fool for not knowing what I didn't know. And I think in order to really be able to pivot and take on new skills and dive in and be curious and excited, you have to be willing to stand in an arena of people and say, you know, I don't know this thing and I need you to teach me this thing.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the things that I talk about, I teach customer service trainings for IATSE in the Western region. It's one of the things that I talk about a lot is trying to break down the barriers of if somebody asks you for help, like do not make your union brother or sister feel silly for coming to you for advice. Is the more we make somebody else feel ashamed or feel vulnerable for asking for help, they're not going to. So I think it really takes somebody who can recognize when they're feeling shame and they're feeling vulnerable, let that go, right? If somebody is very defensive about I don't know this thing, or I'm afraid to ask because I'm afraid how I will look, it's going to deter them from wanting to learn a new skill.
Well, let me tell you from like a perspective of someone that's been in the industry for many years, right? Like, as you mentioned, 15, 20 years. It is very difficult to look at yourself as being completely a rookie or a newbie at something new when you have a lot of strengths in a skill set or a set of skills that you pulled on all those years. So now to be really facing something that you've never done before and having to start from the, basically having to be, the beginner from the ground up. Like I remember like sort of like similar experience with you, because sound engineering is my background as well. I've done some lighting design as well. And video was really not something that I would touch unless it was part of video directing, sort of like show calling as well. But it wasn't something that would be hands-on. And I started like beginning of the pandemic with not even knowing what keyframes were. Dealing with editing a bunch of videos and asking questions and asking friends like, hey, what is a keyframe? How can I edit this? How can I use keyframes? And then many months later and hundreds, if not thousands of hours later of editing content and videos and all the things, I'm like, that is the silliest thing ever. But that was my beginning stage into video production. Now I'm running full suite vmix, operating multiple channels of streaming and concurrent streams, and I'm like just laughing at myself like, wow, I did not know a lot of things in the beginning. But it's like you mentioned, having the ability to, I think, look at yourself and say, hey, just because I don't know this thing, that does not erase all the knowledge and all the skill sets that I've got in this field. And it doesn't make me any lesser of a person. And just being confident in that alone, I think that gives you the ability to learn something new, to learn a new skill when, in many cases, you would feel embarrassed or you'd feel shameful really to even ask a simple question like, how do I use keyframes to edit this video?
Well, it's so awesome to hear you say that. So many people are afraid to kind of admit where they started and where they are now. But just in listening to you tell that story, it's wonderful to hear, how you pivoted and you were confident and you asked the questions and like, look where you are now, right? And if you had never asked those questions and you had never kind of taken a step back in the mirror and said, okay, like I am a confident professional in the events industry. I'm confident in myself as a, clearly very educated, very intelligent, very ambitious woman. And like, I can do this. That confidence led you to ask the questions and to know that it's okay. It's okay to not know what you don't know. And then following that curiosity, like you've built a lot out of that, which is great.
I love that. And I love that just saying that, reinforcing how important it is, especially for new professionals, new women coming into this new field, to embrace the fact that they are, at the start of their career in a chapter that me and you have been once or twice in their lifetime. And my chapter looks a little different now. Your chapter looks a little different now, but we've all been there, and it's okay. Many times in life, we start all over again at chapter 1 before we get to chapter 50 or 100, right? And it's very important to not compare yourself in your journey where you're at with, hey, well, I should be so much more advanced, because I know sometimes I don't have enough patience with myself, knowing that there's so many more things that I need to learn, to be like the almost expert in this one area. And it's hard sometimes to look at other people that are way far advanced in their, journey, and not compare myself and say, man, how come I not know all of those things, and not give myself the grace that, one, I have, I've done all this work yet. And I have to recognize that. I have to be grateful that I have been putting all this work in, but also this is where I'm at. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to stay here. I'm going to move forward. Each day moves me closer to whatever the next step should be, or the next chapter is, right? And I hear a lot this idea of opportunity, to be given opportunity, right, in this field. Do you feel like you have to also show, like you mentioned, curiosity, a desire to learn, a desire to put yourself in spaces and places that they don't always feel comfortable, especially if you don't have all the knowledge, right?
Yes, they definitely don't always feel comfortable, but I do think that you're right, is you do have to show people who can give you opportunity that you want the opportunity. That sparks a really good topic that's going around lately of people saying, I only want to do what I've been contracted to do. I only want to do what I'm being paid to do. And there are times when I will often, volunteer myself to do things that are not within my scope of work. But the reason is, I'm curious and I want to learn. And I've found that a majority of my growth in my education has come from taking on things that I'm not necessarily being compensated to do, but I'm doing them because I personally want to grow in that area and learn in that area. And if it benefits, the person that's already employing me or paying my paycheck, then that's great, right? Then everybody in that situation really is learning. And I think that you have to put yourself in those spaces because no one is going to pluck you out of a crowd and say, hey, I heard you might be interested.
Yeah.
Come with me. So I think it's very true that, like you mentioned, it's a busy industry. It can be very time consuming. And for those of us that are interested in taking people with us on our journey, I want to take the person that wants to be here. There's 100%. A little bit of as a mentor, I think you're willing to kind of bust people out of their shells and you can kind of see when somebody has it and they want it, but they're a little trapped in their shell. And you got to figure out how to crack it open. There's a difference between, I think, that person and somebody who's interested but not even willing to raise their hand to take the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have been in live events, for quite some time now and work with so many different type of talent, crew members, techs, engineers. What would you say is the secret sauce to managing people? I mean, hundreds of people and some of them with, let's just, admit, quite some intense personalities.
Big personalities. This industry has a lot of big personalities. I think that's the hardest part in event management and in event staffing and event producing is the people around you. The show, I firmly believe the show will only be as successful as every individual is successful around you. And I think the secret sauce to managing hundreds of people is understanding who they are at their core. I loved in your introduction when you said, talking to live event professionals, we're often the ones that want to stay behind the scenes and we want to stay behind the scenes for a reason, but we're all incredibly talented and do pull off miracles and we make beautiful spaces out of nothing. And I think a lot of that talent comes with the things we were mentioning, having to be vulnerable, having to put your creativity out there. And I think that those personalities stem from, those things like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not creative enough. It stems from our insecurities. And I've always found that learning who your crew is at their core, learning who the people are around you at their core, and then breaking that down, right? Not fighting it. It's the secret sauce. People will come to you with complaints. They'll come to you with compliments. They'll come to you with needs. A lot of times it's complaints, right? I don't know why society loves to complain, right? Society feels like if they're not pointing out a problem, they're not adding value. And I think you have to strip past the attitude and get to, why is this person mad? Oh, they're stressed out that you won't like their design, or they're stressed out that their paycheck was late and, bills to pay. Or they're stressed out because the producer said something to them that made them think they didn't like the work that they did. And now they're feeling really self-conscious and insecure. And we have to honor that, right? We have to not fight the complaints or fight back, but we have to really honor what's going on in people's hearts.
It's almost like you need a therapist license to be managing and working with people, especially at that level. Because we all work with people, but when you are in charge of so many different crews and personalities, and making sure that they also work together and vibe together. That's I'm wondering how many personality books have you read and how far away are you from getting your license as a therapist?
I thought about it. Honestly, I actually thought about pivoting my years of experience in managing crews and putting together, teams of people that work well together. And I've talked a lot of crew members off the ledge over the years. Yeah. I thought about taking that and pivoting it into being like a life coach, because I figured that wouldn't require me to go to years of school and get a doctorate and whatnot, but I could still use my experience in dealing with people
Absolutely. Well, hey, if ever there's another pandemic that you need to pivot to something else, you know what you're gonna do.
Yes, I was managing the shutdowns of live events long enough to have a long list of careers that I thought, okay, next time, like I could be a life coach, I could be a running coach. I've got a long list of things started.
I
You know,
love
I
it.
think we all had just enough time to figure out what we would have done to pivot, and then it started coming back, which, I'm grateful it did. Telling stories and connecting with human beings has been at our core since we were writing on walls with sticks and mud. So it had to come back eventually.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it was going to be happening is just not knowing how fast. I think that's where the money were on, like who can guess how fast are we going to bounce back? That would be, the best investment ever to just put your money into that. But I want to piggyback really quick to the previous question that I had. And I want to ask you, from your vantage point of view, what type of changes have you seen happening over the years, and what kind of changes still need to happen for the best, especially from a inclusivity, diversity, equity point of view in the distribution of labor and scheduling and managing crews in event production?
Inclusivity as far as making sure we have diverse crews and giving everybody the best chance possible. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great question. So, I think about this a lot, especially as somebody that's in staffing. I might be coming at this from a bit of a biased perspective because myself personally, I feel like the teams that we've created are pretty diverse. So sometimes I think I lack greater perspective on the lack of inclusion that's happening in other places.
Mm-hmm.
Because I personally feel like, I looked around one day and I was like, wow, it's great to see such a diverse set of people out here on
Mm-hmm.
the site. But I realized that may not be, everybody's experience. And I truly think it takes folks in my position that are staffing shows and folks that are in positions of leadership to give everybody an equal chance and an equal shot. And, as far as it being inclusive, I really think that the environment itself lends. The thing that needs to change is the environment, right? Like we were talking about earlier, is it's hard to get into it because people are afraid to look silly. And maybe this is a bit of an old adage. I hope it's an old adage. But, when I was first starting out, the thing that I noticed was that, if you walked into a room full of people and asked, hey, like, what's a LECO? If you didn't know the answer to that question, no one's going to go, oh, like it's this light over here and this is how it works and this is what it does. Yeah. People are immediately going to go, oh, you don't know what a LECO is?
Right. It's like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, I don't like to talk about this dark side of kind of the environment that we work in, but I think that's the way to break it down, right?
Yeah.
It's like we have to break down those
and honestly, if you think about it, right, LECO is such an insider's language. Like it's a term that really, it's just insider knowledge as in what it means, because by all standards, it's a source for lighting fixture. That's what, if you Google it, that's what you're going to be shopping for. But we, behind the scenes, we're not, yeah, that's a LECO. Like, what like nobody calls it a source for lighting fixture, right? So it's almost like even breaking the barrier between the type of like language that we use, that it's not just for the technicians and the AV crews and the production, but it's okay to translate to someone that might not use that particular term in their everyday language.
Yeah. Yes, it's true. There's a lot of like insider terms and insider ways of working that if you haven't been, sort of grandfathered in or sort of like absorbed into the industry, you don't know those things yet. I think it's hard to come in completely as an outsider. And going back to, me being lucky enough to have those opportunities from a young age, just talking about privilege in general, like I did have a fairly privileged upbringing and still, do have a very privileged life. And that's afforded me a lot of opportunities that other people don't have. When you think about it, it's like, how do more people get a life like that? How do you have more opportunities in school? How do you have more opportunities with your education? It's like, you have to have your foot in the door somewhere, right? Mine came from school. And if you think about it, specifically talking about women, so I've been really into Her First 100K lately. I was listening to one of their podcasts. And the thing that I learned, which this was mind blowing, and like, I know it's true, but to hear it and to hear it be true was even harder hitting, was that women weren't allowed to have credit cards until the 1970s.
Yeah.
not allowed to open a credit card as a woman until the 1970s, and you were not allowed to open a business loan as a woman without a male cosigner until the early 1980s,
which is crazy.
that's
Yeah.
crazy. And it's only like, a couple decades ago. It's not
It's
like
like,
it was that long
exactly.
ago. So when you think about how does this industry become more diverse, I think it can be a much larger conversation about what opportunities are the minorities given and the protected classes given from as early as grade school.
Yeah.
Now,
But even, as a mom, right, in this industry, which, yes, it's very true that by so many is considered a male dominated industry. You might be working for a larger, national production company that might have a more diverse labor pool, like you mentioned. But in most places, smaller production AV crews are very much male dominated. And many times I go back and look at like myself as a mom and you as a mom, I've obviously done my years in this industry and I've been here for a while, but there's many times when I have to give up opportunities because I have to think about the fact that I am a mother and I am a wife and then I am a professional and I have to balance all those three things in a way that doesn't damage my family, doesn't damage my children. Like I still get one-on-one time with my children. I could be gone for work 1 week after another. How helpful would that be for my children? If my husband was traveling for work, every other week, I think that's more acceptable in our society, even to this point, than if I were. I try to stay kind of balance out my traveling out of town for like maximum 2 weeks out of the month. But even that's
that's
a
a lot.
lot. That's a lot,
That's a
right?
lot. Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. And I think, as a mom, that's a lot. I try to balance it too. I do try to balance it the best that I can, but it does. It takes away from your professional opportunities. It's like having to be home. And I'm going to say the phrase, having to take care of your children can take away from your professional opportunities. But I want to backtrack and say getting to take care of my daughter is a privilege and an honor. And I love it, right? I love it to death. And if I ever had to choose one over the other, it's my daughter. 11 times out of 10, it's her, right?
But that also does not take away from you being a lesser professional just because that's where right now in this season of your life, your priority is. And I think it has to be a distinction because I've also heard, the other side of the conversation where, well, now that I remember right as I, made the decision to start a family, well, now you're not going to be as committed to your work as you were before. And that is so unfair, for someone to say that just because I choose to be a mother, which honestly, it's a privilege. Like you say, not everybody has that ability or the option or even the blessing to carry children to begin with,
Yeah, I think you saw the look on my face. The fact it is so irritating, and you hear this in professional interviews a lot too. It's like they ask women, how do you balance it all? How are you managing all of it? Gosh, that incites me to my core to hear somebody say that you wouldn't be as dedicated to your work because you're going to be a mom. Because it's
exactly.
not.
I'm like, aren't you a father? Aren't you dedicated to your children?
I'm so offended for you for that question. Oh my gosh.
Well, it's the things that, many times we don't get to say out loud because one, you're either afraid of the circumstances you're in, that might be some repercussions, or you're ashamed, or even the fact that it's a reality that we face a lot and we see it as normal, which is not.
You see the questions as normal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And when you were saying, they asked you that, I'm trying to think when the last time somebody asked me that question was. I get that question on a daily basis or statement. A lot of times it's a statement is, oh gosh, I don't know how you balance it all. Lately, I think I've been known to say, I don't know either. Here we are. But here we are, right? And I had to make a choice. So my daughter turns 6 in 4 days. And that's the thing that I remember is that's actually kind of when my career changed from being a boots on the ground production manager and show caller to being somebody who works primarily from an office or from home, but is not actually, I'm no longer calling shows. On the rare occasion, I get to get out and do one or two, right? But taking the step back from being the person on show site to being the person supporting everybody at show site That's when my career changed, was when I had my daughter. So before that, I was traveling and touring. I was probably gone on the road. I want to say 65 to 75% of the year I was out of town. Just like like if you said yes to every opportunity, you could probably be,
Gone all the time.
you could be gone, gone till November, is the famous saying. You could be gone till November out on shows, piggybacking. And when I was pregnant, I thought it would be so easy. I was like, oh, well, my partner and I are no longer together. But at the time I was like, oh, well, the baby can stay with my partner if I have to go to a show, or we can hire a nanny. And it sounds so easy in concept. And then the baby came.
Yeah.
And
it's a new reality.
It is a very new reality. And then the conversation changed, right? And now my partner was like, oh, you can't leave me for a week, right? And then, then I went, I can't leave her with a nanny for a week. Like that can't happen, right?
Yeah.
So then you actually get to meet your kids, and the conversation changes. And again, I was lucky enough to be able to pivot into a new role, and not everybody gets that opportunity.
Yeah, many times what that means for many women in event production is having to change careers because maybe their applicable skills do not always translate to an office or to another role that might be complementary to what they were doing before. And it's the sad reality of event production. But before we go down and dive into the darkness.
Oh, I do have one more thing on that.
Yes, please.
How it can change for moms and single dads, right? I don't want to discredit the dads.
Well, let's take a quick sponsor break, and then we're going to come right back. And I can't wait to hear all about that, because that's where we want to elevate the conversation back to the hopefulness. The reason why we're in this industry for 20 something years is because there is hopefulness at the end of the rainbow.
And it's an amazing industry.
Absolutely. 100%. Okay, we'll be right back and continue this amazing conversation with Maggie. Stay tuned for a quick sponsor ad break. Before we move any further, I wanted to give a quick shout out to our main sponsor, Trifan Events, which is a boutique event planning and production agency that will come alongside you, offering personalized event planning and technical support, strategic event design, production and technology management, and flawless execution for live, virtual, and hybrid events. The team at Trifan Events is passionate about planning and producing event experiences that get people involved with true moments of interaction, engagement, and co-creation, while offering white glove treatment throughout the entire planning process, enabling you to reach your event goals with the use of creativity, production tools, and event technology. Find out how Trifan Events can plan and produce your event become memorable. Go to trifanevents.com. Welcome back to the conversation that we are having. Such a interesting, and I'm enjoying this so much right now. And as we were diving into the dark end, it's time to bring it back up and figure out what are some of the changes that are being done and can be done to change the status quo and give more opportunities to women that are in tech roles, engineer roles, in event production, and make it attractive to more women to flourish in this field. Because as Maggie and I were just saying, it is an amazing industry to be in. And if our 20-something years of being in industry does not prove that, I don't know what else will at this point.
20 plus years in the same industry and still happy and still smiling. And excited to wake up every day. I think that's what happens, right? Is getting out of bed and being like, hey, I get to do this another day. A colleague of mine was actually at a convention last week and called and said, I just saw the coolest thing. And I said, what's that? And he said, they have on-site childcare.
Wow.
They have on-site childcare here for the attendees for show hours. And, life got busy, and I didn't get to circle back to the conversation to ask him if that was open to crew and staff or if it was just open to attendees. But I think we've seen small changes through the course of time, right? I've seen more actual convention spaces being built with nursing rooms in them. And I've seen more events build nursing rooms or mothers' rooms for their attendees that actually have to be there with their children. And the professional world has been very anti-kid for a long time, right? Like, if you don't have a place for your child to go, you can't come to work today.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate enough that I'm in a space where if my child gets sick and can't go to school or can't go to summer camp, I can work with her from home. My office is very supportive. So if need be, it's not an everyday thing, but if need be, no one gets angry if she's there once in a blue moon. But to just see the professional community embracing families and family growth, I think, is the change that we need to see happen specifically for parents, right? It's like, we talk about the village and we talk about how in the US is a little bit unique in our culture in that like professional environments are very anti-kid. Home raising environments now, we're very like one generation per household. Your one generation is responsible for your children. But in other countries, you see that that's not true, right? Like, other countries still very much believe in the village raising your child. Parents have to take some responsibility for that though, right? And say like,
absolutely,
if the village is going to help me raise my kid, I'm not going to complain about how the village raises my child, right? And in the US, I think some parents can get a little too
offended of such or such
right?
concept. Yeah.
I would never be offended at another adult. Like, if
oh my gosh, tell me about
like,
grandparents that live thousands of miles away. I would love for them to be closer just so they have free childcare.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I think, as we're starting to see professional environments embrace the concept of family a little more, that was one of, the blessings of COVID. I know a lot of people don't like to hear about the good things that COVID brought about, but one of the good things it did bring was that I think professional environments are a little bit in the US now are a little bit more understanding of the fact that we are trying to have lives outside of our jobs and that we do have families outside of our jobs, and allowing workers the freedom to kind of mesh their professional life in with their family life, because it has to get done, right? The parents out there, they have to be a parent every day and they have to work every day. And so for the professional environment to kind of give a nod to that and allow people to be more flexible with how do they take care of both things simultaneously is the positive change that we need to see more of.
Absolutely. And I feel like, like you mentioned with virtual events that we've done and all the Zoom meetings that we've had, so many of working from home remotely, especially in the beginning of the pandemic when, trying to do all the separation thing and different degrees based on where you're located. We also open a window into each other's lives. So what before was just like kind of like a strict separation between when I'm at work and I'm this professional, and when I'm home. Now it's kind of become this mingle of like, oh, I actually see the room that you live in. It's like I see a little bit of you and who you are outside of this professional persona that, it's almost like you embrace when you're in a professional setting. And it's almost like it's become a more of a, oh, people do have another life outside of work. It's like, hello, we've had that the whole time.
I've been the same person. You just know a little bit more about me now. It's amazing to see who people really are when their lives become more blended,
Yeah, absolutely. So here's one question that I want to dive into. I mean, this has been such a fantastic conversation so far. And even the fact that we're touching on topics that I'll be honest, I don't have the opportunity to touch on a whole lot in my conversations on this podcast or in general in event production, because I don't have another woman to talk to that has been through the same similar like path I've walked myself. And many times, having a conversation like this with some of my, male counterparts, they're kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, they know. They're just afraid to tell you.
But I love this so much, and the fact that we touch on so many different things and the opportunities that many women, I hope that they feel like they still get, even in a place that sometimes it's hard to break into or it's hard to stay in. So do you feel like in so many ways this has changed since the pandemic, since the rise of like different level of event professionals with skill sets such as virtual event production, but those skill sets now, and I've seen this very much pan out in a way that as we're going back to in-person, if you don't have the in-person production background, it's a little hard to navigate now taking what you've learned over the last 36 months, as a virtual event producer and applying it to a hybrid type of event production setup? Do you get to work with techs that really raised themselves up, females or not, during the pandemic, and now they need to figure out how to apply the skills that they've learned during this time to a in-person production?
That's a great question. So I've seen it all sorts of ways. I've seen people that kind of had their background in really more IT technical skills. So that's the other thing that I think, we see a lot is that there's IT techs and then there's AV techs. So I've seen,
and sometimes they're not the same. Many times
they're not the same. They're not the same at all, right? The skill sets are vastly different. And so I've seen a lot of IT techs fully flourish in this virtual world. Mm-hmm. And now that we're moving, we kind of moved from virtual to hybrid to fully live. I think it's the IT techs that fully flourished in this virtual world that people that are now producing live events are saying, hey, that's my IT tech that, saved my bacon on my virtual show. And now I want to see them on show site at my hybrid.
Running my AV.
Yes, running my AV. And they get there and they're like, okay,
yeah,
right, like this is a very different thing. And it's so funny to watch the two different skill sets, right? You'll have the in-room techs that are actually setting up meetings, and then you have this IT tech that flourished in the virtual world that doesn't have,
the production background and knowledge.
They don't build screens and they don't set up amp racks and they don't do that kind of thing. But then they can walk over to the setup and approach the laptop. And they can figure out like, okay, why is the audio not getting out through Zoom to OEP, right? Like, why is that not happening? Why can I not hear the sound on my virtual platform, but I can hear it in the room? And an in-room tech will have no clue what to do, right? And now those IT techs are walking over and pressing a couple of buttons and voila, everything works. And now they're getting the opportunity to learn.
So what you're saying, it should be a symbiotic relationship that can actually play out really well in the real world in the future of hybrid events.
Yes, it is a symbiotic relationship. We need each other. So I've seen it all sorts of ways of techs that were very strong in the live world that are now learning from these IT techs on what's happening in this digital virtual world. And the digital virtual people are starting to realize what we actually do in a live room. So I've seen it all sorts of ways.
So let me ask you then a follow-up question to that. What type of new opportunities this new world is maybe providing for women that have become virtual event streamers, virtual event producers, as we're going back to in-person? Is there any opportunities available for those women? And I'm talking women specifically because I feel like a lot of the event planners that I've worked with have actually turned into, if they survived this pandemic, is because they literally started a brand new skill set. They learned a brand new skill set, and that was how to produce virtual events.
I think there's absolutely a lot of opportunity for women, especially in that scenario, especially for anybody out there that's hearing this. If you have fully pivoted like that, you were an event planner and then, taught yourself the skills of how to produce a live or a virtual event, you absolutely have the skills to continue to grow and learn it in the room. So, I would hate for anybody out there who's thinking like, oh, I was very skilled and very successful in this virtual world, and now I'm afraid that virtual events are going away in favor of hybrid or in favor of live. Maybe it's just because virtual is new to me, but I sort of feel like if you survived producing or being a tech or streaming virtual production or taught yourself video production, like you are more than capable of learning live. I feel like going from live and then learning hybrid was challenging. It's like, it's more challenging, I think, to teach yourself virtual production because you're kind of alone in this silo and you have to do it by yourself, right? But if you had the skills and the confidence to do that, I would encourage you to look out and see who's hiring, because right now there's a lot of opportunity in general. There's a lot of open positions in our industry for live. And think about all the things you taught yourself alone in a room for virtual production, like getting into an entry-level position for a show site role and then having people around you to support you, you will flourish. Once you learn virtual, like you've got live all the way. You definitely have the soft skills and the confidence.
That's awesome. So let's pivot the conversation really quick to something that, what are some of the things that you learned while you were touring? Because you mentioned a little bit of your career while touring that you feel is most applicable now in today's corporate and association convention business than ever before.
Oh, wow. It's about learning what is and is not in your control. So
Mm.
one of the hard lessons that I had to learn over and over on the road is that things will happen that are out of your control, that are going to prevent you from getting to your end goal. But your customer still wants what they asked for. And if the trucks are late because they were stuck in a snowstorm, that's out of your control. When they ultimately arrive to the venue, that's out of your control. People will get sick, crew will call out. There's so many things that happen in producing an event that are out of your control. And on touring, I feel like I woke up to it almost daily. It's like one day the trucks are late because they're stuck in a snowstorm. The next day we can't get into the building because the building's promoter booked the venue for the wrong time.
And your timeline didn't change. You still have to get that show set up and ready to
know
go
what?
live at the same time.
Yes, no matter what happens, like curtain is still supposed to be at 8 p.m. So I think the thing that I learned that is more applicable than ever right now with, we're seeing a lot of supply shortages.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are, mass trucking challenges, getting from A to B, shipping challenges, gear shortages, labor shortages. We are currently faced with more things that are out of our control than I think we ever have been before in the live event industry. And my days in waking up to a new city, a new building, new people, a new thing that is preventing me from getting to my goal that is out of my control is like accepting and making. I think a lot of people in the events industry are also kind of control freaks.
No, you don't say.
We have to be, right? So accepting and making peace with what is out of your control is the best, that's what I learned today. It's the most applicable thing. It's like, okay, what's out of my control? What can I not change? What is the goal and what is in my control? What tangible things can I do to overcome this hurdle? And sometimes it comes down to, if your truck's not going to make it at all, but curtain's still at 8, you just have to have a hard, honest conversation with the people around you. Be honest and say, okay, in order to get this done, I need to cut this or I need to cut that. But here's what I can substitute, right? Everybody hates that we've had to pivot so much, but it's like, what can you substitute? What can you give somebody in order to make up for the thing that they wanted that they're no longer going to be able to get? And how do you sell that, right?
Yeah. Like you wanted to have this massive LED screens and the LED tiles are nowhere close to being here. How about we go to projection screens?
Yes. Right? We actually had some LED tiles catch on fire the other day. So there's things that happen.
I feel like I hear this from Jason all the time.
That's not good. But yeah, right? Like things happen. Things catch on fire. Crew members. I think I've had today alone, I've had to replace a lot of crew members lately because they're sick. And like, I can't control that. And I think helping my customers, internal and external, right? Helping all of the customers around me understand what's in my control and what's not in my control, and helping people know I'm on your side and all of the things that are in my control are being actively worked on with urgency. But the things that are not out of my control, I'm going to let go. I can't control the fact that somebody got COVID and can't come to the show, but I can do the best that I can to get you a similar skill set, right? And then not being angry. If a customer is mad at you for something out of your control, you have to eat that, right? Like let them be mad. Let them be mad and tell them that you're on their side and that you're working on it.
I feel like you just gave that one piece of advice for every event planner, manager, producer out there that is struggling sometimes to accept the reality of things not being in reality as they are on paper or how they were supposed to be or how they were hoping to be. And this basically gets us to the conclusion of a fantastic conversation so far, Maggie. I mean, I enjoyed it so much, and I want to thank you for sharing so much of your experience and your learned wisdom. Anything else that you want to add in closing as something that would be helpful for anyone that's been listening so far, and just out of your expertise that you've seen that has helped someone advance in their planning for their next event?
Yeah, absolutely. As far as in their planning for their next event, I would say Be honest with yourself and your customers about what you can really achieve. Don't sandbag, but don't overpromise. I think that's the biggest thing, and be realistic with your expectations, right? I think a lot of people overpromise and set themselves up for failure, but just make sure you're setting yourself up for success. And then, I love that the new season of your show is all about encouraging people to get into this industry, especially for women. Women can be few and far between out there, right? I see the first cruise, but then every now and again I look up and I am the only woman in the room. And I think, gosh, I thought we moved on from that 10 years ago. But sometimes we have, and sometimes we haven't, depending on the setting. And I think the biggest thing that I would tell women in particular is that there are some scary personalities out there, but there are a lot of people out there, especially other women, that want to see you succeed and want to help you succeed, and to find those women that will celebrate you and support you and to lift you up and, ask questions, make relationships to help propel you forward. And I think you'll find that the best part of the events industry is its people. So I would encourage people to forge those relationships, not be afraid to lean in with those questions, and that those relationships are really what is going to carry you through and help you succeed in the industry.
I love that. That couldn't have ended this episode any better, Maggie. I am so grateful for our conversation. Where can our audience connect with you if they want to hear more of your wisdom, or maybe just, maybe ask about some of the opportunities that you mentioned that they are out there, but they don't know how to connect to them?
So the two places you can find me most easily, I am on Instagram at Miles with Max, and on LinkedIn at ML Sinek, S-I-N-A-K.
Fabulous. Well, friends, we'll have those links in the episode notes as well, so that you can connect with Maggie and learn more about her journey in this live event industry. And as far as we're concerned, this is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening till the very end, and stay tuned for our next episode airing out soon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Events Demystified podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to review it, rate it, and share it with other event professionals that could benefit from it. Connect with us on social at Events Demystified Podcast. We would love to hear from you and what you're up to. If you'd like to learn more about Tree Fan Event services and find out if we're a good fit in supporting your event, can we help your event be successful with a 20-minute free consultation? Link in the episode's notes. Thanks for tuning in.